Hello, good people. Welcome to our show. Bad people, welcome to our show. Medium people, welcome. Anyone who want to learn more about Google Analytics, because we are going to discuss today about GA4, a new version of Universal Analytics, because we have a few days left. Probably when you will listen to this episode, you can use only GA4. And I'm so excited to discuss this topic with MaryBeth. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, a big pleasure. I want to learn more. I want to get new insights. I know you know how to share value. You're so kind to share this value. Before we start, just remind our listeners about you, about your business, and anything that can help to learn more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's MaryBeth Maskovas. I own a consulting firm called Insight Lime Analytics, and we specialize in driving business impact through digital analytics. That can be pretty broad, but obviously the topic today is Google Analytics. So we help medium to large organizations improve their data maturity, find new ways to use the data they're currently collecting. And the best way to hear more from me is to follow me on LinkedIn. It's MaryBeth Maskovas on LinkedIn, or visit our website at insightlimeanalytics.com.
Nice, nice. Love it, love it. Awesome. Okay, guys, you can find the link to the website and LinkedIn account in the description below. And I wanna start from the first question. I have the feeling about GA4. It's like when I was in university. I usually prepared in the last day to any exam. Uh, uh, any college gives time, like you have an year, to learn the season, but you can do it in the last day, like many other students. And it's the same with GA4. Google gave enough time to change analytics. But can you tell, for most listeners like me, who have the struggle to change analytics because of I spoke with a few clients that told me that new version is not user friendly for them. But I don't have this feeling because I started to click all features, all buttons, to get this experience. So can you tell how to mitigate this pain to learn about new analytics?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously at this point, if you're one of those students that waited to the last minute, it's going to be a little bit more painful because you're not going to be able to have something to fall back on. And really, the approach that you took is one of the ways to really just is migrate as fully as you can. Hopefully, you have support from a team to do that, or you're using resources online. And then start using the platform now. You're going to, if you migrated right now, you're not going to have a lot of data in there. So there might be some kind of transition period that you're going through. Um, I would agree, actually, that when a marketer or a non analyst or less technical marketer gets into GA4, it's very different from Universal Analytics. Universal Analytics had a lot of out of the box reports. You can debate whether that was somewhat clunky, and sometimes when you wanted to be more specific, it was a little difficult to navigate, but you had a lot to work with from the beginning. GA4 isn't like that. They will most likely make some preset reports, but there's not much. So the big difference is really you're needing to build what you want to look at from scratch. So if you want to look at source medium or something like that for marketing purposes, you're going to have to build that table from scratch to be able to see the information that you want, add the metrics that you want. But my advice would be to certainly, if you haven't already migrated, to do that. Because right now you're going to be in a place where you're going to be doing it and you're not going to collect data for a few weeks realistically. But get that done as quickly as possible, and then get your analysts and your marketers and everyone into the tool as quickly as possible. And I'd recommend looking at some non-Google resources. Google has some resources they put out. I think they have updated some of their learning materials, but it's not super extensive. So companies kind of like mine or some others that are really digging into the reports and how to use them on YouTube and things like that is really a better way to do it, depending on your budget, because there's just not that many resources that Google themselves has put out yet.
Nice, nice. I wanna ask you how to learn about GA4. And for example, it's interesting that I found a bunch of analogs appealed, because people have this I don't know, hard learning, tough to understand because interface is different. It looks the same, but most features are different. And I think for me personally, I think it's better to spend time to learn about GA4 than to pay for analogs, even if you get simple experience, but the time that you will pay money, you know, uh, takes more than learning about this GA4. So, any tips how to do it?
Yeah, I mean, aside from finding some resources online that you really like, some other tips that I have is to take some things from the analyst playbook, which is um, something called a data dictionary. So when you're moving over to GA4, ideally you were taking a look at what you actually were tracking in Universal Analytics as well and had a list. So here's all of the basic metrics that come with Google Analytics out of the box, and then here's some other things, form submission, purchases, et cetera, that you've created, and use that list or dictionary as something as a reference when you're exploring GA4. And they all actually are called explore reports, because then you actually know what different items you can look for, right? So you instead of having that kind of like, you might be like, oh, I can't remember what it's called when I'm looking at a marketing source or when I'm looking at users. You'll need to have that reference sheet, and you can't. That Google does also have like their out of the box like documentation of the reference sheet. So one recommendation is to have that open when you're exploring, so you can remember what metrics you can look at. So that's one tip. I think another one is to take a look at your favorite reports in Universal and try and recreate them in GA4. This is a really good exercise. We've been doing it since the interface was even kind of introduced, because then you can really understand what you need to put together to make that same dashboard, and helps you get familiar with all of those metrics.
Mhm. You mentioned about big difference, but can you tell what kind of difference we have about if we compare Universal Analytics, GA4, and uh, any, I don't know, your feeling about that? I mean, like, new analytics is better or not?
I mean, I think the jury's still out on that one. As someone who's worked with a lot of other analytics tools as well, and from the analyst perspective, I can see where Google Analytics is going. And there's a lot of conjecture about why they've made this change. Data privacy is one of the options, but also there's some other tools that are more similar to what GA4 is, which is Adobe Analytics is a little bit more similar to this format where you kind of have a blank page almost where you're building out the reports and the information that you need from scratch. So the big differences between Universal and GA4 are Universal Analytics had an interface that was very cookie cutter. There was a lot of reports already in there. If you just implemented even the baseline tracking, you would have reports that covered a lot of different areas, including website performance and speed, marketing. And then with a little bit of extra implementation, you would also have like full e-commerce funnels and everything already in reports that you can just click through and explore. GA4 has some reports, but it's nowhere near as extensive. And instead, it has this explore reporting where there's a few presets that you can load in, but you're really having to select what you're looking at. So if you want to look at a funnel, you're really having to select every single event to build out that funnel, for example. So when you open it up, there's not a lot in there. The other big difference is it's transitioning to more of an event style tracking versus session style tracking. And that means that also some of the metrics have changed. So some of the things that people are really familiar with, for example, bounce rate, aren't necessarily tracked the same, not necessarily called the same thing. And from an analyst perspective, what I see is the pros of this is that it's more flexible for more types of websites. Universal Analytics was very much for e-commerce websites. Even if you were like, for example, your website, right? where you're going to want to focus on things like form submissions. You had to do custom tracking for that, and then it never really fit into the the standard built reports. GA4 could be for a lot more types of websites, SaaS websites, and things like that, where you can really track more and put in more events that fit what you want to do. Not that in Universal couldn't, but now it's just like not like you're in this cookie cutter report that doesn't fit that type of website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned about bounce rate, and I remember in the first version of GA4, Google decided to hide this metric, but then after some complaints, Google, added this metric one more time, and you mentioned that it's quite different with the previous version. What is the difference between the first version and in GA4?
Between Universal Analytics and
Yeah,
GA4?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think some of the other differences are that it's more analyst friendly than it is marketer friendly. It's, there's a lot of features actually that have been activated, like being able to connect to BigQuery and things like that, that make it something where sometimes actually once everything's set up, you can query that data a little more easily. That wasn't necessarily something that you could do easily when you were on the free version of Universal Analytics. It's a little more privacy centric is what Google will tell you. And that means that there's settings that are different as well. So like you said, they've kind of changed things a lot. And I think that we're nowhere near done with them making tweaks and adjustments to this platform. So as you know, like, as you mentioned, like with bounce rate, they've gone back and made adjustments. There's other features that they're adding on the daily. I've talked to some representatives from Google where they'll joke like, "Oh, I opened up the interface; it's different today." And so there's a little bit of that that's still happening. So it's a little hard to comment on how exactly it will be completely different because they're not done creating it, even though we're already into full migration mode now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got it. And I love this metric engagement, because we got this metric on social media. I check out all the time, and right now we have for our website because it's important to know how much time people spend on websites. We didn't have this metric. We analyzed by bounce rate, average time on site, but right now we can know. And it depends on the website. Some pages need to retain longer, some not. So, can you tell how to learn from this metric and how this metric can help us marketers to increase or improve the quality of our content?
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well to start with, right? Like before we were combining a few other metrics together to kind of get a feel for what we were doing on the site. And bounce rate has been this iconic thing for a really long time. But really what it was looking at is the amount of people who looked at your site, didn't like it, and left. But what is more important about something like engagement is that you are understanding who does engage with your content. So I think the big difference there is while it's great to minimize exits from your site, so making content that's sticky that way, the engagement rate is kind of a more appropriate way to look at it, because then you can understand, instead of like this site has a lot of people leaving, which ones people are engaging with more heartily. It's kind of like flipping the script a little bit. And that's really key for understanding which types of content that you've created are the best fit for the audience that you want to capture. The other nice thing there is that then you can pull that through and understand, does your engagement rate correlate with purchases or whatever other actions really key on your website? You could do the same thing in theory with something like bounce rate. You could categorize like pages that had a lower bounce rate and understand whether they also were places where if someone touched that page, it improved traffic. But this is something that's, I think, just a nice kind of like way to look at it differently.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell about events? I got a lot of questions about events, how to set up them, how to learn and understand data from events. So can you explain how it works and how it can be helpful in our process?
Yeah. So, I think I mentioned a little bit that it's like more event-based tracking. So in Universal Analytics, we were focused also on sessions, which none of these things are necessarily going away. But what an event is anytime there's an action on the site that someone takes that you want to learn more about is really the
Yeah.
super simplistic way to think about it. So even in Universal Analytics, this was the same. There's certain things that you want to capture, such as someone clicking on a sign up button or watching a video, and all of those are events on a site, and also broader into like when someone makes a purchase or adds to cart. And so that's how you can measure through time, and through a session what's happening, or through a specific user. So so that isn't necessarily like a new concept or anything. That is really how Universal worked as well, but it wasn't the central focus of the tracking. So that's the way to think about it. So anytime there's something you want to know about that a customer would be doing on your site, that's an event. And with GA4, there's some nice things actually about how it's set up, where you can a little more in an automatic way set up events. So there's some ways where you can identify those sorts of triggers, like a button click, and set that up and designate it as an event that you want to follow a little bit more easily in the interface, versus Universal. So that's like one of the big differences. So there's like a few different things that you're looking at. Event-based tracking is really focused on the events above other pieces, and how that makes a difference for SaaS websites, for example, or websites that are not just e-commerce, is that your whole experience isn't necessarily about one end goal, like making a purchase. It's about having people, that are logging into the SaaS product, interacting with it. What things do they do, and how does that lead to them engaging again in the future or not? So that's something that's a bigger difference there. While things like purchases are actually events as well, that's something that it's a little stronger when you're thinking about it all from that perspective of like what events are key for my users to take.
Mm-hmm. And I like one tool, Crazy Egg. Yeah, we have similar tools that have heat map. Do we have anything like that on GA4? I mean, like when you can learn heat map and understand where you can leave or your customers, lose your customers.
Yes and no. Like I think I would, I don't know what they're going to come out with, right? Like they might keep changing it, but they don't have something as strong as a Crazy Egg or a content square. Really, like that's something when you start to get into really understanding your customers' data, I still am recommending considering having a secondary tool like Crazy Egg, because what the difference is really there is that you can see a lot more. They do user recordings, for example, with Crazy Egg. So you can segment and say, all right, well, someone left their cart. Why did they do that? What did they do before that? Was there something frustrating going on in the experience? And you can watch that experience, which isn't something that Google does. Google does have some tools, like there is like an add-on that you can do for Chrome where you can see like the overlay and see some of the like click rates and things like that on page, which is something that Crazy Egg and some of these other tools do, but it's not necessarily as like visually friendly, I would say.
Yeah.
So you have to like, you can look at some of the same metrics, like, okay, where are people flowing to and from is something that you can see in Google Analytics. So where do people go after they go from the homepage, and where do they go in a shopping funnel? But you're not going to see exactly like what they did on the page, or like where their mouse was hovering and things like that, which is what tools like Crazy Egg are really useful for. And as an analyst, I love to have both, because I will identify something like a drop off on a certain product page, and then I can go into a heat mapping tool and look at that a little more deeply and be like, okay, well, what is it about this page if I couldn't identify something like a slow load time in Google Analytics?
And I know another tool, Microsoft Clarity. And can you, if we compare Crazy Egg and Microsoft Clarity, what do you think? Which tool is better?
I'm actually not familiar with Microsoft Clarity, so sorry, I won't speak to that one. But I can talk to about a few other ones I mentioned. Like there's some called like mouse flow or content square, and really
Okay.
like all of those tools. Some of them will have some nuance of the features, right? But like it kind of depends on the size of your business for one, because things like Mouseflow, Crazy Egg have some lower price points, right? And there's some others that are much more enterprise. And what you get with more enterprise is um, more nuanced visualizations. So you get to, there's some things that are a little more advanced. You can do more advanced tracking. Like if you're running A/B testing on your site, you can actually compare an A and a B version on your site. Not saying that, I'm not familiar with all the entire requirements list of like what
Yeah.
Mouseflow has, but that's some of the differences. And now there definitely are some other tools coming into the market that are trying to be a little more predictive. I do believe that's somewhere that GA4 is also going to go. But they have just kind of scratched the surface with it and hinted at some of it.
Yeah. I just want to share a little bit about
Sure.
Microsoft Clarity. It's free, 100% free. And this tool has heat map as well. For me, it's hard to compare to Crazy Egg, but it's free. Definitely you can try. And you can add to Google Tag Manager. So and learn from this tool. To get heat map recordings. Many great insights. So probably it's better to start with Microsoft Clarity because it's free, and then to check out some other tools like Crazy Egg. I don't know. Yeah, name them. I want to ask you about struggles. I always have struggles when I start something new. For example, when I started PR campaigns, I failed. I wrote a bunch of press releases. I pitched them. I got nothing, but I acquired experience, how to do it. And then we hired a team of who can write great press releases. We hired people who can pitch them. And we got mentions on CNN, many other great websites, Forbes, because of having the process. But I usually start myself. Can you tell the struggles that companies, people still have by adapting to GA4 and your tips how to find another way?
Oh, yes. After, it's about 3 years now that we've been attempting to get through GA4 migrations. Some companies have taken almost that whole time for the bigger ones. There's a few really key barriers or things that come up. The first one is almost no companies have what I was calling a data dictionary of their current implementation. So it means that for years, different marketers and analysts have come into that company. They've added new events. The website has changed and events haven't been removed. So this huge barrier is that to move over, you need to know what you currently have. And almost no company knows what they currently have and what they currently use and need. So that ends up being something that we or the company internally spends a lot of time on, is going through and trying to figure out, do we need this event that's firing? Are we actually using this? Is this the right thing? And so that's a huge barrier that has taken a lot more time than I always expect it to, especially for any type of website that has some sort of complexity in how they've built it, or also complexity in the team as time has gone on. I think that's one of the biggest barriers is figuring that out. Another one is that even once you have that information and you're moving it over, there's always some sort of issues that come up. Something won't fire properly in Google Analytics 4. It wasn't implemented quite like it was intended. And so there's a lot of troubleshooting that I've also seen where, we try and move something over and something about the way the site works or something like that. You have to go back and figure out what's going on. And I think that leads to kind of one of the third barriers I see, is that both because it tracks slightly differently and there's certain metrics that are calculated differently, and the fact that sometimes it doesn't go quite the way you planned when you're trying to copy over and dual tag, which we're kind of past now, but I can talk about it in a minute if you want. There's going to be discrepancies in the data. So you're trying to
Mhm.
move over to GA4 and you're like, oh my God, my revenue is like 20% different in this platform versus this platform. Which one's right? And so you have to go through this process of like checking with your finance data again and saying, okay, well, we were 10% off in Universal Analytics, and on Google we're closer, great, or GA4, or something like that. So there ends up being a lot of troubleshooting. It's not necessarily just like you push a button, move over the tags, and everything is done. And then and then comes figuring out the platform. So that's another part where then there's marketers and other people who have been familiar with Universal Analytics, and they're like, okay, great, we got everything moved over, and they open up GA4 and they're like, this looks nothing like what I'm familiar with. So I think there's a lot of learnings there, and the way that we've really gotten through the like not knowing what's in there is like we have built a process on how we get in and dig around and figure out what's firing, and map that all out. And that was definitely like a learning curve of like figuring out how to do that in the most efficient way.
Yeah. And I opened your LinkedIn profile because I like opening LinkedIn profiles. And what I see that in your background, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics. Can you compare uh, both tools and tell what kind of advantages we have by using both tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they're just two different options, right? Kind of like you could consider all the different CRMs that you could use. One of the biggest difference between Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics is that Google has always had a free version and Adobe does not. So
Mhm.
with Adobe Analytics, you're coming in at a price point of 6 figures per year to use the tool. And so that's really like the biggest difference, right? Is that you're starting off that way. Um, when you get to a certain level of traffic with Google Analytics, you're paying about the same amount. They're really not hugely different in the pricing once you're enterprise. Um, and one of the differences I think alluded a little bit to earlier is that Adobe has always been event-based in its tracking, and it always has had more of a free flow, build it yourself sort of analysis platform versus having a lot of preset reports. So instead, if you wanted to have a certain report on a certain country and wanted to include certain information, you would drag and drop practically the metrics that you would want to build for and the tables and the visualizations. So it's a little more, similar to this Explore report that's coming out with GA4. I think really the other difference is that it depends on the stack that you're working with. If you are really heavy into Google advertising and things like that, then you may want to stay on more of a Google stack, I would say. But then there's other people who have already bought into things like Adobe Target, and some of those other tools where they want to be more of an Adobe house. And really, it's kind of a strategic decision that is made by those bigger companies. And you could argue one way or the other. Personally, I do as an analyst like Adobe more, but the other barrier there is that like everyone knows Google, and it's going to be a lot easier to find people who are familiar with it and can analyze in that platform and help implement new tracking. And Adobe, it's a little bit smaller of a group that's familiar with it, so that's like kind of, I guess, a downside, I would say. But then there's also some things where their features have been a little more refined and they have a lot more support for you and things like that. And since, I know some of the people who listen to your podcast are more of like the smaller business size too, there's some other players coming out like Piwik Pro, which is like a European brand, which are some other ones that are coming up free or have some sort of like base free implementation, especially since Google Analytics, while GA4 is staying free-ish, there's some features that are definitely going away now that it's switching over to the new version.
Valuable. Nice. Awesome. I want to ask about my resource of data. I always use this resource when I do mistakes. I always learn from them. It's my resource to learn from my mistakes, from failure. I hate to do mistakes, but yeah, I keep doing them because when you start something new, you need to do mistakes because we learn from generic strategies, best practices. And I want to ask you about common mistakes that companies, people still do in GA4 from your experience, and what kind of mistakes we can avoid. I mean, like to learn before doing something.
Well, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse a little bit with this one, but I think the number one mistake is to not have migrated yet.
Ah,
um, if you haven't done that and you're staring down at this July 1st, like a few days, or when this podcast comes out, it might have already happened. Uh, is to really focus some resources on that right away. You don't want to have to explain to someone higher up in the company why you didn't have data for a month on your website, because that migration didn't happen in time. Other common mistakes, I think a lot of my clients are still kind of getting their legs underneath them when it comes to even figuring it out. So I haven't seen people making like major mistakes that aren't ones that I see with all data. So maybe I'll speak to that a little bit, which is like, I think the other biggest mistake that people make is to not use the data enough. A lot of times companies will only support themselves with data when it already supports where they wanted to go anyways, but that's not where data is valuable. Data is valuable when it actually is contrary to what you were planning on doing. If you were thinking about a certain blog strategy, but you look at your data and you say, oh, wow, actually, this other topic or this other strategy fits us better. What do we think about that, and how do we factor that into our decision making? Not doing that is one of the biggest mistakes I see. So if you're investing time and energy into moving over to this tool, and you have invested money into having digital analytics, you should use them. I think, I know that's like a simple one, but that's one thing. Little mistakes is like, it's definitely a little bit more finicky since you're building the reports yourselves, like what metrics you can compare to each other. So sometimes you'll try and build a report and it doesn't work. So it's just being familiar with like what types of things you can turn into a table, right? So like that's like a little one. But so that's like from the really big to like kind of like little things I see. But really like just not using your data is the biggest mistake you could be making.
yeah, I agree. Data, especially today when we have this huge competition at any field, you need to learn your customers and to use the right data. And once I watched interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he explained about his success. He told that all success depends on creating clear goals, the right vision, what he wants to achieve in sport, in movies, in politics, everywhere. So he created clear goals, even others don't believe it's possible, because in most cases his friends, family members can tell, no, forget about that, you can't, it's impossible, just imagine, you need to compete with million people. But he achieved all the success because of having clear goals. And what I usually see marketers use vanity metrics like volume, traffic, I don't know, like likes, comments. I mean, like these metrics don't help to sell. And for example, if I decided to promote the keyword SEO, I need to compete with big companies like Moz, Neil Patel, Ahrefs, big companies. They have resources, they have authority, trust, many things. But big companies usually ignore a lot of data because they can't take everything and far away from that. But anyway, can you tell what metrics are important in GA4 and which metrics are less important? Because I think we need to understand how it works. So these metrics will help during the way, and these metrics we can or ignore or pay less attention to them.
You've touched on one of my favorite topics.
Wow.
Yeah, so I love to talk about this. This might be a slightly different approach than someone who's just going to speak to GA and like the numbers that are in there. Yes, having this correct goal set, and in business we're calling those KPIs a lot of the times, tied to those goals, is crucial to interpreting whether you're successful or not and getting to a specific goal. And what I subscribe to is, I can't take credit for this. This is Avinash Kaushik. I recommend following him on LinkedIn as well, and subscribing to his newsletter because it's amazing. But is to create pairings of KPIs. And when you ask the question about like, well, what are the ones we should ignore and which ones should we focus on? It depends a little bit on your business goals and what you're focusing on as a business, because there might be a metric that's totally unimportant to one business that's going to be crucial to yours. So digging into that a little bit further, starting to talk about actual GA4 metrics, if you're thinking about an e-commerce site, for example, what you're trying to achieve with that site is going to determine which metrics you pay attention to most. So if you're trying to really grow revenue and you're not so worried about profitability, then that's going to be different than a company who is really just doesn't necessarily want to put more money into advertising and really wants to just refine and tweak where they're at, are going to have different metrics that they focus on. Things like conversion rate are obviously one that everyone's going to focus on, but what I challenge people to think about is, based on what of those maybe two businesses you are, what is the KPI that keeps conversion rate in check? Because if you are only optimizing for conversion rate, so you're just trying to make it higher and higher, you might actually do something like completely reduce your average order value. So you actually might end up getting less revenue because you're saying, okay, I only want to like get people who are like going to buy on a coupon or something like that. That's going to make my conversion rate go up, but it's not necessarily going to make my revenue go up, or it's not necessarily going to make my average order value go up. So I think that that's like a really key part of it, is making sure that you're looking at a value pairing. Really common one is like conversion rate and like maybe like monthly revenue goals, or conversion rate and average order value, because then you're saying, okay, well, yeah, I want my average order value to be high, but I also need my conversion rate to be high.
Nice.
And then, you talked a bit about vanity metrics. I would say a vanity metric is one where it's not necessarily tied to whatever effort that you were doing. GA4 has, it's kind of marketing and behavioral analytics. So if you're only looking at, say, traffic coming from your specific advertising campaigns, so you're just looking at, wow, I brought in thousands of users from Facebook ads, and you're not actually looking at something like engagement rate, your favorite, as well, to really compare whether that traffic is doing anything on the site, then it becomes a vanity metric. But getting new users to the site and having them engage isn't necessarily a vanity metric when you're putting them together.
Yeah, awesome, valuable. I wanna ask one question that was simple to ignore, hard today, impossible tomorrow, about AI. Today I think it's hard to ignore this tool, and I used AI before ChatGPT. Today I use a lot more, and this tool help a lot. For example, we got mentions on CNN by using AI, ChatGPT, to edit our content. So I want to ask you, how people who who learn from data, who use different tools, can use AI, ChatGPT, or any other tools to increase results, of their efforts.
Yeah, that's a great one. I've definitely been talking about it a lot too. I can sometimes sound a little bit as like a don't believe the hype kind of person, but it is a really useful tool. I would be lying if I said I don't use ChatGPT to support me. And there's some really great ways to do that. That I think, when I think about the kind of boom of AI and what's possible, what it does for us in the data world is it takes away some of the tasks that we really don't need to spend time doing as a person. So, one of the areas that I'm most excited about, which I don't think very many other people are because it's not sexy, is data cleansing, and how you can use AI to do that faster, better, smarter, way cheaper. So even in Google Analytics and things like that, now you could use a combination of something like ChatGPT and R, even if you're not necessarily someone who knows R as a programming language really well, to help you blend data together, to cleanse out records. I've talked with some other companies that do things like unify customer records in databases so that you don't have duplicates in there. That was something before that was like really expensive to do and not necessarily like you get a lot out of it. But now you can do it really cheap and it gets something, you get a positive return on investment for that. So that's like, from my perspective as like a data scientist analyst, what I see as valuable, but I'm also seeing a lot of other options come out. Google GA4 doesn't have it yet, but I know they will do it, which is they're going to have some sort of anomaly detection and insights that are generated by GA without your prompting. And that's something that Adobe Analytics has had for some time that's really valuable, because like what that gives you is that even as someone who's maybe not like an analyst who can look at almost anything and make all the comparisons and figure out where there was a change in the data, it'll be there right for you. So you'll look at your traffic or something like that, and it'll highlight an anomaly, and you'll be able to click through and see what caused that and determine whether it's something that you need to be worried about or excited about, or whether it's just kind of noise that isn't, oh, some bot traffic hit my site. So that's, a huge deal. And, I've also seen some other things that are trying to kind of replace needing an analyst. I'd say that that's the area where it starts to be a little less useful. You still need someone with really strong business context to help interpret that information, but there's definitely some pieces that make it easier to get to insights faster. I definitely, I think that it's someone who is maybe a little less of an analyst, but really wanted to understand something. I've seen a few AI tools that are trying and integrate with Google Analytics, for example, and then you can ask more like business context questions and have it try and answer them. So, it's just a huge possibility there. I know that there's some people who are saying they're scary applications of AI. All of these ones are fairly practical, right? But it makes some things that have been super manual before a little more attainable for smaller businesses.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, valuable. I never thought about that. So yeah, it's interesting to use data and ask on ChatGPT, for example, how to implement your data according to your preferences. Yeah, I need to test it. Interesting
Yeah,
idea.
it's a great idea. You can do some of those pieces like that. We're exploring some other pieces too of like, how to make that faster. Especially I've seen a lot of people applying it to statistical programming and things like that, where it can help you out. So
I will try. Interesting.
let me know how it goes.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for this idea. And I have final question. I wanna ask you, take your crystal ball and tell about the future, forecast the future, because my crystal ball doesn't work. I tried when I bought crypto. I felt that crypto go up, but yeah, that went down. So, but anyway, I don't put all eggs in one basket. That's okay. I didn't lose a lot, but I wanna know about the future, because we have AI today. Many other things are coming. Now Apple is going to launch this headset, but I don't see a big difference, because most people usually use smartphones, to watch the screen is the same that you have like in your glasses. So can you tell what kind of future will be and how marketers can adapt today to this possible future?
Well, like you said, I don't know if my crystal ball will work, but like, and this is me, the pragmatic futurist here. But I see in the next few years that, obviously, like you said, AI has been around for a while. It's just now that people are talking about it and it's a little more accessible, and they've been working on conversational AI, where it's something that, almost anyone can learn pretty quickly how to prompt it in a successful way. What I see is a few things. I see another reckoning in data privacy. I think that we're not going to get to ride this boom without there being some regulations on how AI is used. And that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to navigate. And especially, I keep close tabs on what's happening with rulings in Europe. Europe has been taking a very different stance than the United States has and other countries on things like this. So that's going to be, I think, something that's going to really occupy a lot of time in the nearish future. I also see that AI is just going to become something that's a little more usable, because if you think about things like, your phone and Siri, it was something that was very rigid in what you could ask and how it would respond. I see that it's going to become something that's a little more part of our day to day or a little bit more useful. Something that beyond it really more acts like something that you see in a movie. I see as like the way you can interact with Siri, a little more of a personal assistant. And from the marketing side, I think it's going to accelerate again. It just seems like everything keeps accelerating. These past few years, it just compounds and compounds. But for marketers, it's going to make it faster to create content that you need to create, faster to do parts of those manual work that you might not necessarily want to focus on. So you can really be focusing on the quality of your content more, the creativity of your content more, and worry less about some of these other pieces. And this is something that has been around for some time, but in advertising and things like that, there's already been tools that have been making it easier, might not necessarily label them as AI quite yet, but are using machine learning and things like that to make it easy to optimize. So I believe that marketing will become more on the creative side again. And you will be, there will be still this arms race of like, everyone can use AI and everyone can optimize with it. So like, what is your edge and what is your story? And that's going to become more critical again.
Yeah. You remind me the story about creativity when Lloyd Richards published a book 11 years ago, and he spent 14 years to write a single book. Yeah, for me, it's hard to imagine how to spend 14 years to write a single book, but he did it, and he used a lot of marketing and sales channels, but nothing could help to sell this book. Yeah, just random sales. Then his daughter posted content on TikTok from account with 0 followers. This video became viral. Plus 50 million people watch this video. And today this book is bestseller on Amazon. And on this video, you can't find the best nice looking design, but it's creativity. It's creative because short video, less than a minute, provokes curiosity. What kind of book is this? If author spent 14 years to write this book. Yeah, so creativity, very important. And I use AI because it can help me to edit my content. I'm terrible writer, but AI can do this job, to edit context without losing the meaning. So yeah, if you are terrible writer, you need to use it and pay more attention to creativity. Completely agree. MaryBeth, it's a big pleasure to get in my show again, to learn from you. You're so kind to share this value. You provided few ideas. I'm going to implement them. Tell the best way how to keep learning from you, how to reach out to you, how to follow you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always so much fun to come on your podcast, and I love your intro as well. So reiterating what I said in the beginning, primarily, if you want to hear about my thought leadership content, LinkedIn is the best way to get me. And so if you just type in MaryBeth Maskovas, you'll find me. I talk about a lot of these different topics, get into data governance and a lot of different interesting things. And then our website is insightlimeanalytics.com. Feel free to check that out. And if you have any questions for me, you can also always email me. My email is marybeth@insightlimeanalytics.com. I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I'll submit website, LinkedIn account in the description below. Listen us on Apple, Google, Spotify. Thanks again for the time. Love it. You lead me to an emergency room. I need to spend time to consume all this information. Okay, guys, love you. See you.